I'm Dr. Suzette Glasner, clinical psychologist and associate professor of psychiatry at UCLA. On my podcast, we talk about current trends in substance misuse and addiction and how we can bring our latest knowledge from addiction science to help inform how we respond to some of those trends. And today I'm going to talk about a very sad and disturbing trend related to youth drug overdose. And I want to start with a story. The story is about a young 15-year-old girl named Melanie Perez. And I chose this story partly because she's from Los Angeles, California, and went to high school in Hollywood, which is close to where I am here in LA. And so I feel a little bit closer to this story than some of the others that I've heard about. Melanie was just 15 years old, attending high school in Hollywood, and her mother got a phone call one day saying that she was missing from school. So then ensued a frantic search for Melanie. Where could she be? And for 8 hours, nobody could find her. 8 hours later, her stepfather came to her high school campus and started looking everywhere. And very sadly, he found her in the bathroom in her high school, and she was already dead. She was only 15, and she ended up taking a pill that, unbeknownst to her, was laced with the highly potent opioid fentanyl, which is the primary driver of youth overdose. Her mom, Elena Perez, determined to try to put some policies and laws into place that would prevent this from happening to another parent, to another 15-year-old kid, and to another family. She really lobbied for the passing of what's known as Melanie's Law in her honor. And thankfully, that law was passed last year in California, requiring all California middle and high schools not only to supply Narcan, the drug overdose antidote that could have saved Melanie's life had she been found in time, but also to provide education both to staff and students in middle and high schools about the dangers of opioids, including fentanyl, and in particular, some of the counterfeit opioid and other pills that are being sold on the streets that are behind these youth opioid overdose trends. So taking a step back from Melanie's story, I want to talk a little bit about the trend. What is the trend? The trend is, despite the fact that overall illicit opioid use has been declining in young people, the trend that is most startling and apparent is that at the same time, the frequency of youth overdose has been increasing. And so the specific stat is in 2022, 22 adolescents between the ages of 14 and 18 died every week from a drug overdose. So that actually leaves drug overdose as the third leading cause of death in youth, behind firearm-related deaths and motor vehicle accidents. And this is being driven largely by the presence of potent opioids like fentanyl and other substances that they are experimenting with or using. Let's talk a little bit about why this is happening. So first of all, teens aren't really looking to use fentanyl for the most part. They're just ending up with counterfeit pills that they didn't know contain fentanyl, and that's how they're overdosing. Teens and young people are particularly vulnerable to the lethal effects of potent opioids like fentanyl because they generally are what we would consider opioid naive. So they don't have prior experience. Their body has not had to accustom to the presence of opioids. When you start taking opioids over time, particularly if you take them in smaller quantities when you're starting, your body starts to build and build and build tolerance to the effects of opioids. And that includes both the pleasurable effects, so you won't enjoy them as much or enjoy the feeling as much over time, but that also includes some of the lethal effects, like slowing down and shutting down the respiratory center. So if a young person takes a super potent opioid, it's a shock to the body, and that toxic and lethal effect of depressing the respiratory system can be severe enough the first time that it leads to an overdose fatality. So teens are vulnerable. We don't want teens near fentanyl or really any other opioid for that reason, if not for other reasons. The other reason this is happening is because acquiring drugs is becoming so much easier than it ever has been in the past. The trend that we're seeing now is that young people are gaining access to drugs over social media. And I want for you parents out there to break down a little bit more information for you on how this happens, just so that you're a little bit more in the know and so that you can respond to some of those risks and dangers and talk to your teens or your friends who have teens and young people in their life. Because a lot of the heartbreaking stories that I've been hearing about online and in the news, in most of those stories, the parents say something like, if my daughter or if my son had known how dangerous it was to even take one pill, he or she never would have done that. If they knew that that pill could kill them, they never would have done that. But there just isn't this awareness as widespread as it really needs to be. And I'm not talking about scare tactics or this is your brain on drugs or anything like that. It's just reality and facts and what we understand about what's out there that you can equip a young person with in order to facilitate or enable them making decisions for their well-being and for their safety. So let's talk a little bit about how this happens on social media. Drug traffickers are now advertising on lots of the common social media apps that your kids are likely on. They're advertising on TikTok, they're advertising on Instagram, even on Twitter. Snapchat is a big one. And they're using stories and posts that are removed very quickly. So like within 24 hours, those posts are no longer available, but they're there just long enough to entice or interest your young person in what they're offering. And the posts are sometimes accompanied by code words and emojis that are becoming known in the young community as being translatable into drugs available. So I want to show some of these to you. You'll see from this drug emoji code list that has been provided by the DEA that there are signals. There are signals for different types of pills that kids frequently seek, like Adderall, like Xanax, which is a benzodiazepine that is used to treat anxiety, like Percocet, an opioid painkiller. So take a look at some of these examples, parents, and know that the emojis are actually designed to evade detection by law enforcement. So they may be constantly changing, but these are just a few examples of code words and emojis that you might see in conjunction with a developing drug deal. So either by commenting on the post or direct messaging the person about the post, the young person will get in touch directly with the drug trafficker, and then they will usually move to an encrypted app like WhatsApp, but there are many others, to have further communications in order to make the deal. Then finally, once they've settled on a deal, these drug traffickers will request payment through one of the easiest kind of one-click cash apps. So they'll do it through Zelle or Venmo. There are a few other ones, Cash App. And then the drug trafficker will have someone deliver these pills right to the young person's doorstep. It's that easy. It's like ordering groceries on Instacart. So no wonder people are accessing these drugs that turn out to be counterfeit pills that are laced with very dangerous substances such as fentanyl. So the next question I want to help you unpack is, how do you know if a young person who you know or love is at risk? Studies show that there are 3 different subgroups of young people who are at particular risk. So the first is just the person who's experimenting. They don't have any history of drug use, but they're just simply curious. This is 2/3 of the individuals who are overdosing and dying. They're just curious. They're not addicted. They don't have a history of addiction. They just hear about pills and drugs that can make you feel good and they want to try it. And they just don't know about the dangers. So this is where prevention and education can really play a significant role. The second group is a young person who is struggling with mental health issues and who is seeking to self-medicate in some way. Maybe their mental health issues are untreated, or maybe they are treated and the treatment's not quite working and they're seeking some way of coping. That's another group group that really needs this education around what to stay away from and what to steer clear of in order to preserve their life. And then finally, you have the adolescent who is already involved in substance use, whether that's alcohol or it could be illicit drugs as well. That's another group that intuitively is at risk for an overdose fatality. So the next question is, what can you do? I think the bottom line here is not to assume that your young person knows about these trends. Or maybe they have a little bit of knowledge of it, but it hasn't touched anyone they know, so they don't really feel like worried about the risk to them individually. So there are several things you can do. The first one is just talking to them about the risks associated with counterfeit pills that contain fentanyl, how common it is. And again, this isn't to use fear and scare tactics, but it's really to equip them with knowledge so you can show them the DEA literature about the frequency with which pills that people get, particularly over social media, are laced with potent and dangerous substances that can be lethal. Young people also need to know, just in general, as a rule of thumb, and this I would just be very clear with your young person about, do not touch any pill that was not prescribed by a physician and dispensed by a pharmacy. Not a pill that was given to you by your friend, not a pill that was sold to you on social media, not any pill that didn't come from a doctor and a pharmacy. That alone, if we can get our young people to follow that as a rule of thumb, is going to save a lot of lives. And finally, if you know somebody who is actively using drugs, advise them to never use drugs alone and to have Narcan. In my last podcast, I talked about Narcan, and you can find some details there around how to use it, the safety associated with it, and all the details that you need to know in order to move forward with stocking Narcan in your home, in your car, on your keychain. But I would advise that young person, and people are often a little dodgy or afraid to do this because they feel like they are encouraging the person to use drugs. And the reality is that there's only so much that we can control. There's only so much impact we can make on the choices that a person, whether it's a young person or an adult, is making from day to day. So if we are equipped with the knowledge that someone we know or love is using drugs and placing themselves in danger every day that they're doing that, we can help them not die from drug use by educating them about how to protect themselves if they're making that choice. So I know not everybody is going to resonate with that idea, but as long as we can help keep these young people alive, we can have a chance to help them recover from their addiction or help them reduce or stop their drug use. But if they're not equipped with the knowledge of what they need to do to stay safe, we may never have that opportunity. Now, this conversation is very different from what can I do to prevent my young person from becoming addicted to alcohol and drugs in the first place. This is more of a safety and harm reduction oriented conversation that I'm having with you today. But I do want to cover in my next podcast, taking a step back from these life-threatening impacts of drug use today. If you have a young person at home, what are the aspects of their life and their relationship to you and your family that really matter that you can try to optimize in order to protect them from the risk of developing an addiction or misusing substances down the line, and even being in the position where we have to manage their safety practices in that situation. So stay tuned for that topic in my next podcast. Thank you so much for watching today, and I will see you soon.